Good evening and a very warm welcome to The Point. I'm Birgit and it's a joy to be with you for the program tonight. Well, the topic on the program this evening is all about the circulatory system, in particular the anatomy and function of the human heart and hemoglobin in the blood. This is going to take the form of a special presentation by our friend and my co-host Dr. Richard Kent. Richard, welcome to The Point.
It's just lovely to be with you again. Thank you, Birgit.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Richard, I wonder if I could start off by asking you the question that as you study the design and the function of these systems of the human body, does it deepen your reverence and fill you with awe for God as our creator?
Totally. Absolutely, totally. I must just say that you may have heard me talking about different parts of the human body, and maybe the sun and the moon and the stars and the flowers and the birds flying and all the rest of it. Whatever I study, I just see the magnificence and the intelligence and the design of God. It is so powerful to actually see how clever God is to design these things which could not possibly have evolved. We're going to talk about the circulatory system, and I'll show you at least two occasions where it simply could not possibly have evolved. This was designed by God. There's no other way it could have happened.
Well, Richard, I'll hand it straight over to you because I know that you have a lot to cover, starting with the anatomy of the human heart.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it. Now, Birgit is a theologian, so we're going to get her comments from time to time. Let's have a look at the first picture. There's our circulatory system, which is actually amazing. It's totally miraculous. It's 60,000 miles of blood vessels. Can you imagine it? 60,000 miles of blood vessels. And right at the center we have our heart, which is about the size of a human fist. It's not very big, actually. And we're talking much more about the heart. We have 10 pints of blood. And the blood moves around the body to provide all the oxygen which we need, all the glucose which we need. For example, our brain, we need glucose and oxygen all the time. If you cut off my glucose or my oxygen from my brain, I will literally fall off the chair onto the floor within 3 seconds. If that blood supply stops completely, within 3 minutes I'm dead. It's as simple as that. And it's the same for most of the other organs as well. We have so many different organs in our body that are all totally dependent on primarily glucose and oxygen. We have a liver, we have heart, lungs, kidneys, spleen, digestive system, nerves all over the place. And everything requires energy in the form of glucose and oxygen for our mitochondria and all of our 100 trillion cells. The way that God provides to get all this glucose and oxygen to all of our 100 trillion cells is through the circulatory system. Now, what else does the blood do? Well, it takes a lot of other nutrients in our diet. We take in protein, carbohydrates and fats, and these are all broken down into tiny little molecules which are taken all over the body to provide nutrients for all of our 100 trillion cells. There are hormones which are taken around. There's lots of white cells which stop invading pathogens like viruses and fungi, bacteria from destroying our bodies. And it's basically our blood is, basically in Scripture says that our life is in the blood. Well, actually our life is in the blood. Our human life is basically dependent on the whole blood system. So let's have a look at the next picture. Now those are individual red blood cells. Let me tell you, we have literally trillions of red blood cells. They're little tiny things, and they look like little platelets, like little plates. They're little concave cells. They are specifically designed for that, in that design, because that's the best possible design to give off oxygen and to take in carbon dioxide, which is toxic, and to also give off glucose and all the other nutrients. It's the best possible shape. Now, I want to tell you that those red blood cells are made in the bone marrow, which we have in our long bones, like our femur. That's the long bone in our thigh, and the humerus, which is the long bone in our upper arm, also our pelvis and our lumbar spine. But I want to tell you straight away one extraordinary miracle. Every second we make 2 million blood cells, every second. But the bone marrow requires a hormone called erythropoietin. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's called erythropoietin. The bone marrow, say the bone marrow in my humerus here, requires a hormone released from the kidney called erythropoietin in order to manufacture the red blood cells, 2 million a second of them. Now, the kidneys, which sort of live below our lungs, you know roughly where our kidneys live, they require blood vessels and oxygen and glucose to produce the erythropoietin. So you have a conundrum there. The red blood cells can't be produced unless the kidneys are functioning. But the kidneys are functioning and producing this hormone called erythropoietin, but the kidneys can't work unless there's a fully functioning red blood oxygen and glucose providing circulatory system, including all the red blood cells, to provide oxygen and glucose for the kidney to work and to provide this hormone called erythropoietin. So you can't have one without the other. In other words, it couldn't have evolved. It's a supernatural miracle. It's called irreducible complexity. And throughout the body, there are huge numbers of occasions where we find this irreducible complexity. Coming back to these red blood cells, they're tiny. Let's have a look and see what the next picture shows us. Yeah, they're so tiny, they move through these little capillaries. Now, let me tell you, we have miles and miles and miles of capillaries all over our body. Thousands and thousands of miles of them. But each capillary is so small, you'd have to have 10 lined up together to be the thickness of one human hair. That's how tiny they are. You can only see them under a microscope. And each individual erythrocyte, a red blood cell, goes through the capillaries, those tiny little capillaries, in single file. That's how tiny they are. So the red blood cells, they go through, for example, the lungs and give off the toxic carbon dioxide, and they take in oxygen. And then the red blood cells also go through the liver and the intestines, and they take on board all the nutrients and everything else. It's totally amazing. Let's see what the next picture is. I can't actually remember. That is actually a human heart. Now, there you see marked the aorta, which is about the size of a garden hose. And it's really tough. It's the biggest blood vessel in the body. And it has to be tough because the heart is a very, very complicated pump. It isn't one pump, it's 4 pumps. And the 4 pumps all have valves. The names of the valves don't matter, but you might have heard of mitral incompetence. It's possible you've heard of mitral incompetence because it's a relatively common condition where the mitral valve doesn't close properly. If the mitral valve doesn't close it properly, you've got to have a heart operation because otherwise you'll get heart failure and die. Now, the reason I've told you that is that the heart is unbelievably complicated. It's 4 different pumps which all contract and relax at different times, 70 times a minute on average, 100,000 times a day. And this heart goes on pumping for all of our lives, and very, very rarely does it give any problem at all. It's totally amazing. But here is another conundrum I want to tell you about the human heart. Is that in the center of my chest and your chest is it's about the size of a human fist. But my heart and your heart has a myocardium, that's muscle of heart, but that myocardium needs its own blood supply. And without the blood supply, it'll die. That's what happens in a heart attack, because the blood vessels the blood vessels get occluded or clotted, so the red blood cells don't provide oxygen and nutrients to the heart muscle, and you get a heart attack, and you'll probably, there's a good chance you might die. You'll certainly get a heart attack, and there will be death of some of the heart tissue. Now, the point is that this system is irreducibly complex. You can't have a heart fully functioning with 4 valves closing watertight, absolutely, pumping at 120 millimeters of mercury into an elastic system of 60,000 miles of blood vessels without its own fully functioning cardiovascular system, to the blood vessels supplying the heart, the coronary vessels. Otherwise the heart will die. So in other words, you can't evolve a heart. It's too complicated to evolve. Where would you begin? You've got to, for a human body to survive, you've got 3 seconds to get the blood to the brain or you're dead, unconscious, and then you're dead. So this heart must be fully functioning, all the valves opening and closing exactly, and the coronary vessels fully functioning, otherwise the heart vessel will die. That's called irreducible complexity. So when people talk about evolution, I just look at them in amazement and say, you must be joking. You don't understand how complex this system is. Let's look at the next picture. Now, my very good friend, Birgit, lives in New Zealand, which is 12,000 miles away. Birgit, is that right?
It is, yes. A long way away.
And every now and again, Birgit flies off to New Zealand, which is wonderful to see her family. Now, one single blood cell in one day travels 12,000 miles, which is the distance from London Heathrow to New Zealand, which is a long way. Let's see what the next picture has to say. There we come back to the heart again. If we could just see the next picture now. Now the heart, I don't want to get into all the detailed anatomy of the heart, but the point is that there are very complicated valves which couldn't have evolved because they must be watertight. But the whole 4 chambers of the heart are electronically operated by what's called the bundle of His. It's an electrical system, and I'll be talking to you a little bit more about that later on. Let's have another look at the next picture now. Let's see. Now, in 1 minute, the human heart is so powerful, it's only tiny, but it's the size of a fist. It can lift a ton weight a yard off the floor in 1 minute. That is extraordinary, isn't it? The hydraulic power of the human heart is so powerful, it can lift a ton weight off the floor, a yard off the floor in 1 minute. Now, if we look at the next picture, in a drop of blood, there's a drop of blood, there are 5 million red blood cells. There are lots of white cells as well, and lots of other bits and pieces in there. Particularly platelets to stop your blood to cause clotting when you injure yourself, but we're talking about the red blood cells at the moment. There are 5 million in that tiny little drop of blood, and 2 million are manufactured every second, as I told you. It's all amazing, really. Let's see what the next picture is. Now, what is this all about? Now, I'm not going to go into detail into the Krebs cycle. That's the so-called Krebs citric acid cycle. We have 100 trillion cells. In each cell, there are mitochondria, and what they do is provide energy in the cells. What they do is, I'll talk about this on another program, but they convert low energy molecules called ADP, adenosine diphosphate, into high energy ATP. And to do this, they require oxygen and sugar and give off carbon dioxide as a waste product, which is toxic, by the way. Now, just to have one more look at that same picture, if possible. That is a simpler. Can we just have one more look at the Krebs cycle, if possible? I think you can see that is a really, really complicated a complicated equation, if you like. And that's going on all the time in all of our cells. If anybody tries to convince me that that evolved by chance, I would look at them and tell, and honestly, I'd be too polite to say it, but I would suggest that they're complete lunatics, because that is the most complex equation I've ever studied. All medical students have to study that, and I studied that for a long time. Let's see what the next picture has got to show us. all this oxygen and sugar comes from the plants, and the plants are really clever. They harness photons, which is energy from the sun, little subatomic particles called photons, and they do this amazing thing, which you may have heard of me on other programs, called photosynthesis, which is totally supernatural. What they actually do is convert water and carbon dioxide into starch, which is basically sugar, but in a higher energy state, and oxygen, which we all need. So we need glucose and oxygen, but actually the plants are made not of glucose, well, some of them are actually, but most of them are made of starch, but that's broken down in our stomach and our livers and intestines into sugar, basically. So let's look at the next picture. So there's the extraordinary thing goes on in our red blood cells, that the oxygen is taken on board in our lungs and then delivered to all the various organs in our body, which can only survive, in particular the nerves, can only survive for 3 seconds without oxygen. And we've got millions and millions of miles of nerve cells in our bodies, and they all need oxygen all the time. Right, how are we getting on? Now, I want to show a little bit more about the circulatory system, and it'd be simple to explain it in terms of a central heating system. So let's have a look at a picture of a house. There's a picture of a house coming up. I know there isn't. Doesn't matter. There are the various organs of the body, all of which need oxygen all the time. Our brains, our stomach, our gallbladder, our bones, everything needs oxygen and sugar all the time. So let's have a look at the next picture. Yes, there's the picture of the house that I meant to show you. Now, that's a central heating system. Our circulatory system is far, far more complex than that. But basically, a central heating system, the details don't matter, but basically you need a pump, and you need a hot water cylinder, and you need a storage chamber up in the loft usually, all sorts of bits and pieces. And I think you'd agree with me, there's no way a system like that could design itself. But that's actually what evolutionists want people to believe. They want us to believe that something far more complicated than a house central heating system designed itself. More to the point, let's look at the next picture, that the heart also designed itself. What rubbish. There actually are the coronary blood vessels, which are so important for the functioning of the blood vessels. Let's have a look at the next picture. Now, there is a pump in order to pump water around your heating system in your house. But that's just a very simple pump. It's only one chamber. But yours has got four very, very complex valves in it. There's no way it could have happened by chance. I think we've nearly finished the pictures, but just let's have a look, see what is left. There is a mechanical valve. And let me tell you, most of us, we've been living in houses most of our lives, and there's one item in a central heating system that's always going wrong, and it's the motorized valve. I think in our various houses we've lived in over the many years in the UK, I think we have a new motorized valve at least once a year. They're always going wrong, and yet we've got 4 much more complex valves than a motorized valve in a house, which motorized valve in a house breaks down at least once a year in my experience. But our valves in our hearts, which are much more complex, they go on for all of our lives. Just let's have a look at that's just basically an idea of what our circulatory system is doing, changing deoxygenated blue blood into oxygenated red blood. I think we've nearly finished the pictures now. There's another picture of the heart to show how amazing it is. And I think there might be one more picture after that. Now, there's an ECG, electrocardiogram. You've probably seen those, or you may have had it done on yourself. And it just shows, I won't go into all the details, but it shows the electrical activity in the bundle of his, so that the heart contracts rhythmically with all the 2 atria and the 2 ventricles all contracting and relaxing rhythmically in order in order that the blood can circulate around the body and that all of your organs can get all of the oxygen, all of the sugar, all of the enzymes, all of the hormones, all of the nutrients and everything else that's required, and that's how God created it. Birgit, what do you think of all that?
Richard, it is absolutely marvellous to hear your input, and just to say thank you so much for sharing. It's so valuable for us to learn from your knowledge and your study in these areas, with the ultimate purpose that it does deepen our reverence for God as our designer. And as you were sharing about the different constituents, the anatomy of the heart, the different constituents of the circulatory system, I was really struck by the complexity of it, the sophistication of it, and it was the first time that I had come across that concept of irreducible complexity, and I can really understand. And my mind goes to Scripture, to Psalm 139, where David the psalmist clearly states that it's God who formed our inward parts. So it does certainly fill us with that kind of awe and thankfulness to God for the way he has designed our bodies in such a marvellous way. So thank you for sharing on that.
It's a pleasure. Now, there's something I wanted to bring out, because Jesus Christ gave us various commandments, but the first commandment he gave us, that we must love the Lord our God with all our hearts, all our souls, and all our minds. Now, I just want to concentrate on the first part, is loving God with all of our hearts. Now, God clearly didn't mean loving God with our mechanical hearts, but to love us with the core of our being. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not a theologian, so I'd like to ask Birgit to explain that to us.
Well, I think you've quite rightly defined that, Richard, when Scripture speaks about the heart. In fact, the heart is referred to 1,000 times throughout the Bible, and when, in the sense that you're speaking about it, it's talking about the spiritual sense of our heart, the very core of our being, the seat of our intention, our volition, our desire, our intentions, our commitments. So it's the core of who we are, and the Bible places a lot of importance on that. One of the Proverbs or Psalms, I think it's Proverbs, it says, above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. Out of the heart flow the issues of life. So the heart is held with that kind of importance. And you quite rightly pointed out Jesus articulating the greatest commandment, where he quotes the Shema in the Torah. And of course, these are verses taken from Deuteronomy, which are a prayer and form the centerpiece of morning and evening prayers in Jewish prayer services. And the particular verse that you're referring to is Deuteronomy 6:5, where it says that you shall love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. So Jesus quotes that in the Gospels, Matthew 22 and Mark as well. And what he's saying there, it's not only loving God emotionally, but with that kind of wholehearted, full commitment. So it's really demanding our whole core, all of who we are, giving that kind of devotion to God. So, I mean, there's a lot that we could say about the heart when we're referring to it in the spiritual sense. We know that the heart in its natural condition is fallen. The prophet Jeremiah speaks about the heart being treacherous, actually, the deceitfulness of the heart in its fallen state. Jesus said that from the heart in its fallen state come all kinds of sin, actually. It's in Mark 7, Jesus says, from within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice. The list goes on. But we know that the good news is that as we actually place our trust in Jesus and in the cross and what he did for us on the cross, and we have a faith response to that and receive that God in his infinite grace and power is able to transform and redeem and regenerate our hearts, so effectively transform them completely. And we have so many scriptures about that. I mean, even in the Psalms, it speaks about God creating a new heart within us. Yes. It's an amazing verse. So we have that hope and promise of our heart being able to be redeemed and transformed. And one closing thought about the heart biblically, we can ground this theologically, because we know that we're made in the image of God, and God himself has a heart in the sense of having desires, having a will, and there are many verses that refer to this. For example, David being a man after God's own heart. Yes. And when God judged Eli, the household of Eli, as the priests in the Old Testament, there was judgment upon his house because of the treachery of his sons. And so with God's judgment, he actually said through the prophet Samuel that he would raise up men, priests, who would be after his own heart. So we know that God himself has a heart, and we are made in his image with this heart, our volition, our desires, the core of who we are. So a few thoughts there, Richard. We have 30 seconds left. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to leave with us all?
Well, you just heard Birgit talking about the spiritual aspects of our heart, and the mechanical aspects of our heart are amazing, but actually the spiritual parts of our heart are much more important. So take great notice of what Birgit said. It's much more important than what I said.
Richard, once again, thank you so much for sharing on the anatomy of the human heart, the function of the circulatory system. We've learned so much. It's been such a blessing. We hope that the program has been an encouragement to you, and to end with the words of Jesus, to love the Lord our God with all of our hearts. God bless you. We look forward to seeing you next week.